Good afternoon and good evening to whoever is listening to this webinar. We got Samuel Pavin from UQ Ventures with us today, and he'll be talking about how to pitch and how to prepare the presentation for your sessions. I'll leave the introduction to Sam himself, and with that, now, Sam.
Okay. Cool. Thank you very much, Sam. From Sam to Sam. Hi there, everyone. So it's still the morning around here in Australia. So I'm gonna get you through a quick or not so quick presentation on how to pitch and how to prepare for the various rounds you're gonna go through in terms of submitting answers to the requirements for the hackathon and the ideally and fingers crossed the final pitching. As a quick introduction about me, I'll just get you a few details. There we go. Sorry. So I'm Sam, Sam Pavin. My background initially, sorry, I've got a bit of a, there we go. Sorry, I had a bit of technical issues on my side. So I'm initially French, so bear with me if I stumble upon words or I bring some additional language in the conversation. I've been in Australia for about now 5 years, so my English has gotten slightly better. I'm here today as the Marketing and Communication Coordinator for UQ Ventures, which is everything entrepreneurship at the University of Queensland. Just talking about the university, that doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about, on the contrary. But I'm not an academic. I come from the business world, and I've got a bit of a background in terms of not only marketing, but startups and entrepreneurship. I started actually at the university by working within the iLab Accelerator, which is a very normal startup accelerator program. I'm actually currently still a strategic advisor to some startups in various industries, going from education to mental health to basic tech startups. I've also had the chance and the opportunity to work in startups, one tech startup from Scotland, another one from Australia. The first actually this very typical startup journey, ran out of cash, crashed and burned at the end of the runway. The second one actually raised funding, and I could leave it in a good place at that time. Prior to that, in speaking of startups as well, and that's also why I'm here today, I've got about 12 years of experience working in and with startups. I was a founding member and the country lead of the IBM Global Entrepreneur Program, which is now IBM for Startups. And I did that for 5 years prior to moving to Australia. Did a fair bit of mentoring, judging, so I've been on both sides of the pitching as well. I'm not going to do too much about me. Just to let you know, this is what I'm going to be talking about. Oops, sorry, just moving the slides forward, and it's not working. Slideshow. Sorry. Okay. I don't seem to be moving the slide forward. I'll just get on it. Okay, this is interesting. Sorry, I'm still on it. I'm just gonna share, sorry, the basic screen. You might not see it full screen, I'm afraid. There we go. So I'll just try to get back to it as it is. Sorry, there we go. So basically, what I was saying initially is this presentation is definitely advice. It's not rules. So I'm giving you tips, I'm giving you some insights, but obviously everything has to be adapted to what you do, to whatever is required from you. There's no, I would say there's no secret sauce, or there's no rule about making a presentation that's going to be winning all the time. You have to learn, you have to adapt, and you have to avoid some of the traps. So that's why I'm giving you some of these pieces of advice. It's not gospel. If someone tells you how to do things, take it with a grain of salt. They know some things, they don't know everything. So why pitch? In one word, the art of communication is the language of leadership. It's not about leadership as such. It's about the leadership of your company. It's about the leadership of your product or your project. So it's about demonstrating confidence. It's about demonstrating the validity of what you're doing. Sorry. You have to convince people, and that's part of what a pitch is. It's an audition. You want money, you want advice, you want a network. You have to actually ask for it and ask for it in a convincing way. Especially at early stages, and we're talking, for instance, hackathon, startup weekends, places where, or events where you don't necessarily have a finished product, you don't necessarily have traction, you don't necessarily have revenue, obviously. So the pitch at this point will allow you to just push your confidence into whoever is listening to you, to your audience. Just prove to people that you're able to not only communicate your idea, but your vision, but also that you're gonna be able to make it happen. And that's the main, I would say that's the main item that you definitely need to focus on in your pitch, especially as you're gonna be getting to the final rounds of pitching. You have to just show confidence in what you're doing and make sure that you can actually tell people that you're there with the right idea, with the right technical tools, with the right team, and that you're the right ones for the job. At the end of the day, if there are some technical requirements or requests, you obviously have to address them as well. So what type of pitches? I'm just going to go through these very quickly. It might not be directly relevant to the requirements of the steps for the hackathon, but it's something interesting to consider, even for yourself in general and in the course of building up what you're building. The elevator pitch is the very short pitch. It's supposedly for random encounters or very quick chats. It's something that could come up in any situation. You want to be able, within 10 to 15 seconds or a little more, to articulate what you're doing, what your value proposition is, what your difference is as well, and what makes you the one person or the one team that people want to buy in. It's you have to work basically around just what your product or solution is, what the relevance of it is, the vision, the needs of the market, and how you're going to make it happen. It's literally 3 sentences, and it's something that needs to trigger interest in people and get them to ask more questions. Elevator pitch comes from elevator, obviously, a 30 seconds ride, potentially with strangers. But beyond that, elevator pitch in your current context is a good way to actually validate or refine what you're working on. If you're going for coffee or meeting random strangers on the street, which it might be a bit more difficult these days, You can actually talk to them, present your idea, just get some feedback if potentially they can provide some feedback and if they are relevant to what you're doing. It's a very good way at the stages you are to also refine what you're working on and make sure that it matches some of the requirements or needs that people may have, or that at least your target customers may have. The other kind of pitch I'm going to mention that's going to be more of the focus is the on-stage pitch. Obviously, this looks like a photo from the past, blast from the past when you could still do in-person events. And that's part of what made pitching, I would say, quite cool. It's the ability to deliver usually something between 3 to 5, 6 minutes on stage in front of people with slides as a backup, and go through the journey, go through the history of whatever you're building, who's building it, why and how. Just put together the whole story in front of an audience and just make sure people can really relate to what you're doing. That's your chance to be a bit more human, to be more approachable, to bring the passion in as well as you're speaking. Elevator pitch will be a bit quick. This is, I would say, your time to shine on stage. For most startups, and that's part of it, you have to present, as I was mentioning, what you're doing, and that's what you're going to be doing with here in the context of the hackathon. You also have to assume that the idea you're working on might not be unique. The technology is not necessarily unique. So what you want to do is obviously make sure that you're executing, that you're doing the work, and that's going to be what really makes a difference, that you're actually addressing the right audience and that you've researched it. So you make sure that you're bringing value to them. And at the end of the day, that's one of the major points that you have to consider. That's where the difference is. It's in the execution. It's not whatever idea you're working on. It's not necessarily the skills of your team. It's going to be important, but there are a lot of skilled people out there. And what you're doing is really what matters. But what matters even more, and that's where pitching becomes really interesting and important, is also demonstrating that what you're doing and not only has value, but that you're actually doing it. Nobody knows what you're doing until you're actually showing it. So it's basically show and tell. Think back about school, when you were doing show and tell, you could prepare for ages or prepare for 2 seconds. What really matters is what you're actually showing at the end of the day. Moving forward to a bit more specifically about the slide decks. I'll cover a bit more in the coming slides, but the basic rule around slide decks is keep it simple, stupid. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be long. As you'll see, this presentation is a bit longer than a pitch. Obviously, it's not a pitch. So that's my reason for it. But an average slide deck needs 10 to 15 slides. And that's very, very general agreement between venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, some advisors in the domain. I've put a few links on this presentation, and the first one is the 10 slides you need for your pitch from Guy Kawasaki. Guy was an evangelist for Apple, an advisor to many startups, usually a fairly well-known name in the domain. And this system of having 10, 12 slides covering the basics, I would say, and the main points is definitely only what you need to show. You just need to show it the right way. So at the end of the day, and that's what I was mentioning, just use templates. You don't need to reinvent the wheel when you're pitching and when you're building your slide deck. There are like a flurry of templates. Even Google, if you go to Google Docs or Slides, have a template for pitching. But that's your starting point. Just leverage that. Don't make it hard on yourself. The second point is follow the guidelines, because, and that's going to be the case with here, every audience you're pitching to. Every configuration, I would say, will have specific requirements. Just make sure that you know what they are and to adapt to these. You have to adapt, you have to repeat, meaning whatever pitch and whatever slide deck you've built, it has to evolve. It has to keep living. It's not something that's static, and it has to change. So you might actually start and build one slide deck and another one, depending on the audience, depending on the industry you're addressing, depending on whatever context this is, if it's an event, if it's a hackathon, or if it's actually an investor meeting. So definitely keep it up, keep it alive. I've actually added to this slide one of the links to the hackathon's judging criteria and submission requirements. Just make sure to leverage that to be on point. But I would say wait, and let's have a 2-second break. We're talking about slide decks, but I would say don't follow the template. Not yet, at least. Before you actually fill boxes or slides with content, you definitely need to understand what you're talking about. As much as you supposedly and maybe or certainly know what you're talking about, you're working on your product, your idea, you want to make sure that you can actually articulate it. And that brings me back very quickly to my initial point about the elevator pitch. We are talking exactly about that. How can you tease what you're doing? How can you explain it in 3 sentences that actually clarify everything, more or less? Because that's definitely the starting point, even of building your pitch deck and building your pitch. You want to be able to tell that story. So if you can't tell the trailer, or if you can't build the trailer for this story, then you can't really tell the story because you don't understand your own story. And that's part of usually the art part of pitching and of building decks. It's, as I was mentioning again, you have to show execution, you have to demonstrate what you're doing. That's telling a story. You can't just have one slide on top of another slide on top of another slide on top of another slide. It has to flow, it has to move forward, and it has to bring new items to the story, but still get you from the point A to the point B that you've defined. And part of it as well, going forward with the story, is you have to be emotional. You have to appeal to emotion. And that's what I'm mentioning here. We start with a splash. That's more about you, how you get started and how you end your pitch. You want people to remember you, sorry. And you want to appeal to their emotions. So start with a splash, find a statement, find something that's gonna call for their attention straight away. You want people to focus on you and get interested in what you're gonna say. So make sure you have an opening statement that's really catching attention. At the same time, and that's also another reminder, you start with splash and you finish with a bang. Make sure that at the end of your pitch, you have this kind of summary of what you've said, but also this kind of big bang statement that's gonna keep them remembering you. So just back to the slides in themselves. I was mentioning the 10 to 12 slides. This is a very, I would say, very brief template or a very brief outlook of what we usually find in most of the slides. The user problems, the product, the solution, why now. Most of you will have answered these already and are already focusing on these items, or at least know what to say around these, supposedly. You just want to deep dive a little bit in these, but deep dive and bring out what's the most important part in there. The user problem obviously kind of speaks for itself. What real world problem are you answering? Are you actually fixing something that needs fixing? Ask yourself the question as well, because if it's nice to have, it's nice to have. If it's needed, and as a friend would say, if your hair is on fire, then you have a problem that needs fixing and needs fixing immediately. So look for these kind of hair on fire problem. The product solution will be in line with the requirements from the hackathon. They have a bit more details about it and the technical side of things, what approach you've taken, what you've actually created. So I won't go too much in depth in there. Why now is the timeliness. Is your solution relevant to market? If you can actually craft a vaccine for coronavirus tomorrow, then you would be very timely. For instance, the market, same thing. And again, we're in the context of working with here. IBM is a partner. We're talking big tech in a way. But in this kind of configuration, I have a past with IBM, and we would look, for instance, at markets that are more than just a few people or small markets. Is your market relevant as well? Are you going to be able to sell or to ensure that you have enough users, even if it's premium or free, to actually address a significant enough market? And is there actually a market? Again, you could also create a cure for cancer tomorrow, but if nobody's going to buy it, you don't have a market. And that's part of the things to consider. The team, again, who are you? What are your skills? What makes you relevant? What makes you different? And what actually will ensure your success? The financials, the business models, we might not delve too much into details, but again, depending on what you want to do with your idea or with your product, it could be good to have some data around that. And in a general environment, this is where, even if you're very early stage and you don't obviously have traction, it's like, just put whatever validation you have. If you've done 20, 25, 30 customer interviews, then you can leverage them there. Competition is just one of the very relevant items. As usual, if you don't have competition, then you don't have a product nor a market. I've never seen anybody not have competition. Even if you're bringing a very, very novel solution, you will have competition because you're still addressing an industry, you're still addressing a need, you're still addressing a certain population. Even if you can't see direct competition, there's going to be something that competes with you. Tablets are competing with newspapers because they've gone digital. It's not print, but it's still news delivered in different ways, for instance. A very basic example. And fundraising is one of the items. You could tell fundraising, you could tell ask. You have to have an ask at the end of your presentation. So in this context, once again, you might not be looking at raising funding. You might actually try to win one of the prizes, but you might have asks, you might have needs. Even if you need just insight from mentors, if you need some help, whatever you need, just make sure to ask it when you're presenting. So more specifically about HackForBetterDays. We've been talking about templates. We've been talking about telling a story. I'll take a step back here because in this kind of context, you're going to have to at least follow some of the milestones or follow some of the rules that are defined as well to present what you've come up with. So I won't go through the whole slide. These are taken from the terms and conditions, so you can read them on the web fairly easily. But as you can see, some of the items here are potentially, if we take the build and up, the here location service, it fits with the product. Relevance, innovation, feasibility, completeness, design, usability, etc. These are items that you're going to be considering for any normal pitch. What you want to make sure here is to actually address these properly and within the scope of what the here company is requesting for this judging. We don't yet know the judges, so what you have to do is really just follow whatever is being provided to you, the criteria and the submission requirements, and make sure that whatever you're providing actually fits these requirements. The interesting thing was for the sorry, for the stream 1 submission, we are talking 10 slides, but 10 slides which are a lot more specific, for instance, than a general pitch. This is for the first round of judging. As you can see, we're still talking about the team members. It doesn't go in depth, but the roles and potentially the one sentence addition or superpower of each team member, it can be an interesting point to add to these. Project, what's your project? What problem is it actually addressing? What population? What's the hair on fire need at this point? We're talking app architecture, technologies, it's definitely under the hood product. You definitely need to showcase it in any case. This might be a bit more extensive, than you would do in a normal pitch. What you would do in a normal pitch in this kind of context would be to have maybe 1 or 2 slides, and then you have backup slides at the end of your presentation. I'll touch a bit more on that afterwards. And that's app screenshots is definitely the demo. If you can do a demo of a product, it's amazing. Again, I'll touch a bit more on that later on, but in the case of virtual pitching, anything that moves might not be the best of ideas at this point. So I'll just go over some more generic items to consider when you're actually pitching your idea, pitching your product. This is really applicable for any type of environment configuration context. Be relevant and know your audience. Basically, who's your audience? And that's maybe one of the most important items to consider, because that's also going to drive your pitch. That takes you back to the very first items on the list. When you're literally, after, I would say, you've written your story, or when you've got your teaser for your product, this is what you want to consider. It's like you've built your teaser. You know what your product is in a few sentences. But is your teaser or is your trailer adapted or speaking to your audience? If you're going to be presenting to investors, you're not going to present the same things or in the same way as you might present to a crowd of general population. In the same way, if you're vying for a prize, and again, you've got specific requirements, you're going to have to address these specifically and still talk to your audience and still appeal to them. So do a bit of research. Again, in this context, as I was mentioning, we don't yet have a specific list or details about the judges for the submissions, but take a few hints from the fact that this is HERE technology. IBM is one of the major partners, so obviously the technology and the context of the hackathon will require the technology to be on point. The next step might be, and I'm completely trying to define an audience here, just looking at the judging criteria, judging at the worldwide size of the hackathon, looking at the different streams. They might want, or there might be opportunities for your products to be embedded further or to collaborate with these guys. So we may be talking some technical judges, some developers, but also maybe some executives from these companies. And to add a bit of entrepreneurial touch, maybe an entrepreneur in residence or something like that. I'm completely making up things. I don't have a clue of who will be the real ones at the end of the day, but try to think about it and try to just make sure that your pitch is geared towards this guy. If it's announced, just research people, research their domain, their history, their skills, just so you can also prepare. And again, I'm going to touch a bit more on that afterwards, but prepare specific answers for them as well. And that also allows you to potentially anticipate what questions could come your way. Knowing your audience is one of the crucial items to consider when pitching. It's going to be a bit less relevant for round one submission as well. You're doing a video pitch still, at least for stream one. But I would say live pitching and addressing judges definitely requires to know a bit more about them. Okay, so second point, it's you. I was mentioning that earlier on. Ideas, you can consider that a lot of people have had the ideas that you have. There's 7 billion people on the planet. It's very unlikely that you're the only one thinking of something that's going to change the world. So consider that the idea or the product might not be the difference. What makes the difference is you and your team. Just make sure to emphasize this. I was mentioning earlier that execution is key. This is where execution really is displayed. This is where you can do the show and tell. It's not only without the idea, we're actually building it, we're making it happen, and we will make it happen. This is one of the most important items, once again. Regardless of how good your technology is, regardless of how good your idea is, if you can't get it out, if you can't build it, if you can't make it happen, then nothing really matters. Passion, authenticity. I would say be yourself, but show that you care. If you're delivering a speech which is boring, which doesn't have passion, which has no tone in it, then you might as well just read a piece of paper written by someone else. You're not gonna demonstrate. You're not gonna, again, show and tell that you're interested, that you really want it to move forward. I had the case, and I'm trying to, as I speak, change the tone of voice, go up and down, and actually be active in the way I'm speaking. I remember being told when I was in high school that maybe when I'm reading, I should actually try to read for funerals sometimes. And actually hit the spot. I was like, well, whatever. But the point was, beyond the fun of it, was actually that I was reading with the same voice all along. And that's something that I've taken on board. It's not always easy. It's not always something that you're thinking about doing, especially if you're talking to your laptop. And that's, again, something that's very specific to virtual environment. But just make sure to be active, to demonstrate how passionate you are about your idea, how you want to make it happen. This is, I mean, we were talking about pitching being an audition. This is exactly that. Act it on stage. Be memorable, pardon my French. As I was mentioning earlier, start with a splash, finish with a bang. You want people to remember you. They want people to remember what you've spoken about. And that's happening by appealing to your audience, by appealing to their emotions. You want emotional replies, in a way, from your audience. And at the same time, that's another item that you have to consider when building your presentation. Don't make it crowded. Don't put words and words and words and words or various images. Just keep it simple. I was mentioning that because the more you have on your slides, the more people will try to focus on your slide and they won't even hear what you're saying. However, on the other end, if your slides are very clean, minimalistic, I would say, then you bring back the focus to you and you can actually tell what you want and you can up your voice, lower it down, and deliver whatever needs to be delivered and make an impression. This is one of the keys to actually appealing and engaging with your audience. Again, we're going to be in a virtual environment for a while. This is even more important, and this is even harder to do. Pitch content, obviously, you have to craft your pitch. We've actually gone through that. You have to know your audience, and you have to adapt your pitch. You have to know the requirements, and you have to adapt your pitch. You have to know what you want to ask for, and that depends on your startup journey, and you have to craft your pitch accordingly. So as I was mentioning earlier, your pitch is definitely a living thing. It's never set in stone. It's going to have to move. It's going to have to evolve. In the same way as you might have different CVs for different jobs you're applying for, you have to have different pitches or orientations of your pitch for the different audiences that you're going to be addressing. And in this case, again, as I was discussing earlier, you want to abide by the rules, but you also want to show why you're doing it, what your passion is about, and where you're headed with your product ideas. And the most, again, important, everything is the most important at the end of the day, but point 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and more, practice. And practice a lot and practice out loud. It's, again, very important in this current context. If you're talking to your laptop, it's not really easy. If you're talking to an audience and you're not used to it, it's even less easy, to be honest. So you want to make sure that you get out there and you're ready. There are ways to do it. Just practice in front of your friends and family if you have a few people around. Just having a crowd makes it hard. Practice in front of your dog. Practice in front of your neighbors. Or just practice in front of a mirror for a start. Record yourself potentially. See how awkward you look or how actually pretty good you are, but just make sure to keep working on it. And that's a way to alleviate some of the issues that you might encounter as well. So just a quick summary of all these points, but if you go through these, you should be pretty much ready to pitch in a general way. I was talking about virtual environments, and I'm getting close to the end, so apology for keeping you. There are practical pitching tips that will apply a bit more specifically to the virtual world and the fact that we have to talk to our computer, which I'm currently doing. One of the things, and that's more a general one, but again, regardless of whether you're presenting on a computer screen or in an auditorium, make sure that your fonts are big enough so that people can read them from far away. And also don't add too many sentences to your slides, otherwise it gets crowded and you still can't read them. That's one of the basic tips. 30 points is the ideal one. Usually you can see it, even if you have 200 or 300 people in the room, they should be at the back of the room able to see it, and try to not mix the font types. Tech check is obviously crucial. As you could see from my example, I did tech checks yesterday. I did tech check earlier now, and it still didn't work properly with the slides actually bugging. So just consider that stuff is going to happen, and usually every time it happens after you've already checked it, so too bad. But one of the important things I wanted to point out in this actually list is the last item, practice failure. As I was mentioning, things can happen. You could see earlier my slides didn't roll. As bad as it is, well, live with it, go back on track. Don't keep trying to make it work if it's not going to work. Hopefully prepare. So you might have pieces of paper, you might have whatever available, but make it happen. If it's going to be some disturbance in the audience, if the sound drops, just be ready to have a comeback. On stage when it happens, that's a good way to just come back on track, give the audience a bit of a laugh, and carry on with your pitch. If you're virtual, I would say in a similar way, your screen freezes, sound goes off, I would say cope with it. With the sound off, it might be a bit more of a problem, but pick up a slide, a blank slide, write on it a message while you're trying to fix things. If the slides are not working, like it was the case for me, drop the thing, drop the backup, and carry on. In this case, you can also print your slides, have a paper version ready for yourself, at least as backup. What does this slide mean? Exactly what you want to avoid as well. This is not necessarily going to happen in this particular context of a virtual presentation, but this is one thing to consider. A white or very clear background with a very clear font in a very clear environment doesn't really work. That's a tip in general for wherever you're pitching. If you're going to be pitching in an auditorium or in front of a big screen, just make sure to test it out. You might need to adapt the color of your background. In this particular case, you might want a black background with white font, for instance. But that's something that you have to remember to double check. It will prove less crucial when it comes to virtual. It's easier to see on the screen, but just bear this in mind that whatever your slides or however good your slides are looking, they might actually not look good at all when you're presenting them. So keep that in mind. So in the new normal, these are some of the tips that you really want to follow. Joining the meeting early is what I did just for this one. So it allowed me to do a tech check. Stuff still happened, so whatever. But always be early because things can happen. Your connection doesn't connect, something goes wrong. Don't use your phone should be something that people know, I would say, but you basically have barely any control. It's a lot less easy to work from a phone, especially when you're presenting. I've had cases where I've followed presentations from phones, and that's a backup solution. Just keep it as it, not a main solution. The camera, there's a setting. Ideally, I mean, you've got your computer, you've got a webcam, you've got an embedded microphone. It's great. In an ideal world, you might want to have an external microphone, which will have better sound quality. You want to have some light in front of you. You want to avoid distractions when you're pitching as well, and that's going to be important. If you see my background, it's very bland. There's just a light wall, light colored wall, nothing fancy, but not really anything to distract you. If there's a vent or if there's a cable popping up or anything, that's going to distract your audience. Try to have a setup that's fairly clear. That's, again, fairly minimalistic. Keep the focus on yourself talking. And look up, or at least put your computer up so that the camera is more or less aligned with your eyes or slightly above your eyes level. And more importantly, prepare some backup. I usually, when I go to a pitch event in the real world, I will have a version of my slides on my laptop, on the USB key, in the cloud, and about half a dozen versions. You want to do the same thing in the virtual environment. I've got a couple of screens here, backup internet, hotspot on my phone, just in case anything drops. Hopefully, I can come back on. Just make sure you're ready for that as well. Importantly, you're pitching to your webcam, and as much as there are lots of TikTok videos and other social media videos being done at the moment with the lockdown, just make sure to practice and to remember to make eye contact with your camera. The trick is, if you have a Lego figurine or whatever, put it just above your camera, and at least that might call your eyes to it. As I was mentioning earlier, don't do crowded slides. People are going to read them. They're not going to pay attention to you. They're not going to listen to you, or they're going to try to, but multitasking doesn't usually work. So keep it very simple, keep it very minimalistic if you can, and do the talking. Don't have your slide do the talking or people do the reading. And I did mention earlier as well, try to go easy when it comes to videos or animations. I understand we all want to demo our products. It's cool when cool things are happening on screen, but you don't know, and especially again in this context, this virtual context, you don't know people's capabilities, whether their laptop is good enough, whether their internet is good enough. Your embedded videos in slides might work, might not work. There's a lot of risks attached to it. So try to keep it more static and slightly less, I would say, less moving. These can be, I would say, backup items that you provide afterwards or on the side. Be prepared for silence. That would be the case in normal configurations as well. You never know, the audience might not react to your jokes, or they might be fairly low late in the afternoon and wanting to just go out. In the case of computer, especially with the audience muted, I know that there's not going to be any response. There's not going to be any noise. You have to get used to it. If you're used to speaking to people, if you're used to hearing reactions from the crowd, bear in mind that it's not going to happen. So you have to adapt, and you have to understand that, yes, you can be very good or you can be very bad, but you're not going to hear any reactions, so you won't be able to read the crowd. Last, I'm getting there, backup. I mentioned it already, but get your tools, get your slides, get your doomsday plan ready. In this particular case, I didn't mention it, just if you can have your phone as a hotspot to cater for whatever internet dropping out. If you have wired internet, all the best. Get some backup slides, get some backup tools. Zoom is crashing, what do you do? Try to find another tool at the ready to actually share your screen and potentially move the meeting to. Just be ready and make sure you can communicate with the audience really at the, like in the blink of an eye. In the particular case of here, for instance, if there would be a problem, we could potentially put a message in Slack with a link to another tool, and there we go. We keep running. So just make sure that you're always ready and anticipating, I would say, plan for the worst and hope for the best, as we say. That's what you need to do. Let's talk quickly about anxiety, and I'm reaching the end, but pitching can be stressful. Whether you're used to it, whether you're not used to it, there are different contexts, different requirements, and in the current environment, it can be sometimes a bit tricky. I didn't mention, just make sure that you know what you want to talk about, that you have a plan, that you build the story that you want to tell, and then practice. And just get used to it little by little. I wasn't used to public speaking when I got started, and my God, one of my early crowds was 1,000 people in a massive auditorium. As they say, focus on one person and talk to this person. That was the trick. In this kind of context, on your laptop, it might be a different kind of stress. If you don't like to do monologues, if you don't like to speak to yourself, then it might prove to be a bit of a pain point. Just train for it. As I was mentioning, use any form of figurine or stick a poster in front of you to whom you're going to be talking. Try to find a way to kind of relieve the stress of the difference or the stress of that kind of situation. And just make sure to practice. The more you practice, the easier it gets. And the easier it gets, the more you can adapt. And the more you can adapt, the more natural you will be as well. If you're struggling, feel free to just have a piece of paper or have notes that you can read and just go through them. At least you can still deliver your message. So don't stress it out too much. And remember, at the end of the day, like especially for the final rounds of pitching, if you're going to be talking to judges online, there's going to be only a few people. It's basically a video conference. So if you want to practice, just get your team members on a video conference and practice presenting to them at least. That might be something that appeals to you as a similar context when you're actually doing the pitching. And above all, and these are my final words, enjoy the journey. It's an amazing journey. You're creating something new, and you're supposed to have fun doing it. It's usually a tough journey. Startups are hard, entrepreneurship is hard, development is hard, but at the end of the day, we're all doing it because potentially we're a bit crazy, but we also enjoy it. So just make sure to remember why you're in it and how much you're going to enjoy it. And yeah, pitching is stressful, but it's not stressful. It's part of the journey, and it's part of the fun of the journey as well. It's a challenge, and you want to overcome it, and that's just what makes it amazing. So thank you very much, and now I'm happy to open for questions, if any.
Right, thank you very much, Sam. There's a chat panel and also a question panel for what attendees to ask the questions. I am going to also unmute everybody. Yeah, you can now ask your questions from Sam. Does anybody have any questions?
Noting that the presentation will be shared anyway, and as you can see, I've got my details on the screen. The @Sampavin address is for Twitter, Instagram, and so on. You're welcome to reach out to me as well if needed.
Yeah, and Sam, if you are on Slack as well, people yeah, so they can now also reach out to you via Slack to answer.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's no questions so far. I think everybody's clear about what you have talked about today. Yeah, thanks for your very useful presentation. I think part of the crowd is still asleep, like Southeast Asia and India. So yeah, I guess like once we upload this webinar on the YouTube and more people see it, there will be some questions coming your way. Yeah,
no problem at all. As mentioned, I'm definitely happy for people to reach out, whether it's Slack or some of the other details. Definitely happy to take some time and answer questions or give advice as well.
Yeah, awesome. So with that, I'm going to give you another few seconds to see if anybody has any questions or you don't want to discuss anything. Otherwise, we can close the webinar and yeah, leave the discussion for another time.
No worries.
But in the meantime, while people are still here, please join me to thank Sam for his very useful presentation. Hopefully it's very useful for your projects and in order to create for you to create a dazzling pitch and a presentation that will capture the attention of the judges and help you win the prize. Yeah, all right. Thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, and we will be engaged with the attendees and other participants through Slacks and other channels. Thank you, and see you later.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you all.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.